This is the second video in ODSP, A Look at the Application. In this video, we will take a look at the information requested in the section on housing. ODSP funds housing under one of two options, board and lodging or shelter. Board and lodging is basically room and board, and the individual will live at home with others, usually with family, and meals are typically provided for them. Shelter includes rent and home ownership options. Typically in this situation, the applicant will be preparing their own meals. It's important to note that there are different rates of funding for board and lodging and shelter, and ODSP does fund shelter or rent at a higher level than they do for board and lodging. ODSP differs between shelter and lodging based on food preparation. It says this: if the landlord purchases and prepares the food, the recipient is a boarder. If the recipient purchases and prepares their own food, the recipient is in a rental situation. To be considered a renter, a recipient does not necessarily need to be living in self-contained quarters, but must purchase and prepare their own food. You might also want to consider whether the applicant's housing situation will be different in 6 months or so when they begin receiving ODSP as compared to what it is at the time they apply for ODSP. For example, it is the month of May. Young adult is applying to ODSP, they're indicating board and lodging. However, in September, they will be attending university and they will be living on campus and paying a rental fee for the university residence. ODSP would begin possibly sometime in the fall, maybe a bit later, so their housing situation by the time ODSP begins would be different than at the time of application. In this situation, it may be better to indicate rent. For most people, the choice between board and lodging or shelter rent is very clear, but for others it's not quite so simple. For instance, you have an adult who's preparing some meals in the home, but not all. Where do they fit within the definition? If you are someone who's not sure which to indicate, you can reach out to ODSP for assistance with this. Some people also choose to consult with a legal professional knowledgeable in ODSP to help clarify their legal position within that definition of lodger or renter. Note that if you are someone who's going to seek legal assistance, if you meet the criteria, you may be able to get support through a community legal clinic under the legal aid system. In that section on current housing situation, if the person will be board and lodging, you will indicate they're not renting, not paying rent, and meals are provided. If the person will be renting, you would indicate rent and meals are not provided. In that situation with the student going to college or university and their status may be changing, you may want to reach out and speak to ODSP and ask them how you enter that information and how you show the changes from when they are away, living on the university campus, and when they are back home in between semesters or in between years. If you selected rent, you will also need to indicate how much rent you're paying. So if you're currently in a rental situation, you'll just list what your rent is. If you are not presently paying rent, but once you receive ODSP, you would be, then you're going to need to find out what that rent amount would be. In the situation where an adult child is living at home with their parent, the parent would then also take on the role of landlord and set the amount of rent to be paid. Now, there's no set formula or specific guideline to follow for this. However, ODSP does set a monthly maximum that they contribute towards rent. We've provided a link in the comments below where you can check the current monthly maximum that ODSP will pay towards rent. If the landlord sets the rent below the ODSP maximum, ODSP will pay the amount of the rent. If the landlord sets the rental amount above the ODSP maximum, ODSP will only pay the maximum. So they will pay below if the rent is less, but they will not go above that monthly maximum for rent. Typically, if you are a landlord who is collecting rent, you would need to declare that rent as income on your annual tax filing and pay taxes on it. However, if you're a parent who's charging your adult child rent and that rent is below fair market value, you may be exempt from this requirement. We've provided a link below from Revenue Canada that provides information for you on this exemption, and you could also consult with an accountant to get more information on your personal situation. The final area on housing asks for information on who lives in the same dwelling as the applicant. There is a drop-down list, so you're going to look at that and you're going to complete this section for each person who's referenced in that drop-down list. And note, it does allow you to do this section more than one time, so you do need to indicate it separately for each person. Once you use the drop-down list, they ask 3 questions for each person you indicate. When did you move in with them? How much do they pay the applicant? And who provides meals? In this area, sometimes it can help to put the applicant's name into the question. So let's say the applicant's filling this out and they indicate parent in the drop-down list. And then it says, Jay, when did you start living with your parent? Well, when I was born. So you put the date of birth for a parent. Jay, how much does your parent pay you to live in the house with you? They don't. So you would put 0 in. And then it says, Jay, do you provide your meals for your parents? No, I do not provide their meals, and you would indicate that. So you're going to go through and indicate and respond appropriately for your personal situation for each person who lives in the same home as the applicant. A final note about housing. A person's housing situation can change over time. So they may start off as board and lodging, but a few years down the road move into a rental. Or vice versa, be living in a rental at one point and then move back in with family and switch to board and lodging. If your housing situation changes, you're simply going to reach out to your ODSP caseworker and let them know so they can assist you with changing your status within the ODSP program. This brings you to the end of the section on housing and completes video 2 in ODSP, a look at the application. Video 3 will look at earned income and assets. Video 4 looks at submission and next steps. You might also wish to review Video 1, which looked at preparing to do the application, and the section on personal information.